Why did no one notice her standing at the edge of the square? The village didn't exist on any map. It was the kind of place people passed through and forgot. Mud walls, narrow alleys, a dry well cracked with age at its center. When the convoy rolled in, silence followed it, thick, unnatural, wrong. Major General Richard Hartwell felt it immediately. After decades in uniform, he knew when quiet wasn't peace. Quiet like this was a held breath. They dismounted. 32 soldiers spread into a perimeter that felt rehearsed but uneasy. No dogs barked. No children ran. Doors stayed closed. Windows shuttered despite the heat. Hartwell gave the order for a short halt, water only. 15 minutes. Routine. Routine never lasts. At the rear of the formation, Corporal Elena Voss leaned her pack against a crumbling wall. She drank warm water that tasted like metal and dust and scanned the village without being told. She was auxiliary support, rear guard, the one you put where nothing was supposed to happen. She had learned to accept that role, learned how invisible it made her. But invisibility teaches you how to see. She counted windows, measured alleys, noted rooftops sturdy enough to hold weight. The dry well wasn't just old, it was cover, a perfect anchor for a kill zone. She didn't like how the shadows fell or how the air felt compressed, like the moment before a storm. No one asked what she thought. The rifle leaned beside her pack, an M24, issued weeks earlier as a formality, backup, something she wasn't meant to use. She checked it anyway, bolt, chamber, habit, quiet preparation. The first shot cracked the square open. Everything collapsed at once. Stone chipped from the well as Hartwell dove for cover. Radios screamed. Tracer fire cut the air. Soldiers scattered toward walls and vehicles. Someone went down screaming. Another didn't move at all. Hartwell tried to find the shooters. Rooftops, alleys, too many angles. This wasn't random fire, it was planned. And in the chaos, at the rear of the convoy, Elena Voss hit the ground and reached for the rifle no one thought she'd need. She didn't look around to see who was watching. She loaded it. Slowly, deliberately, as if the battlefield had already decided. What makes someone act when everyone else is still reacting? Elena settled behind the engine block of the rear vehicle, the metal hot against her shoulder. Gunfire roared around her, but the world narrowed as she brought the scope to her eye. Noise faded. Panic dissolved into geometry and breath. She found the first shooter on a west rooftop, exposed, confident, firing into the square. She calculated distance without thinking. Wind barely moving. 60 meters. She exhaled halfway and squeezed. The rifle kicked, the target dropped. She worked the bolt, chambered another round. No one told her to keep firing. No one needed to. Another shooter leaned from an alley doorway. She waited. Patience mattered more than speed. When he exposed too much, she fired. He fell backward out of sight. Something shifted in the square, not relief, not yet, but confusion. Incoming fire lost its rhythm. Hartwell risked a glance through smoke and dust and saw her. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. Then anger flared. "Who gave her that rifle?" he shouted, pressed against the well. No one answered. Elena didn't hear him anyway. She was already tracking the next position, watching how the shooters rotated fire, how they covered each other. Smart, predictable, patterns always were. She broke them one by one. Each shot was measured, no waste, no panic, just necessity. By the time the west rooftop fell silent, the east alley followed. Then the north field. Leadership collapsed. Fighters ran when they should have stayed still, stood when they should have stayed low. Mistakes get people killed. Hartwell felt the fight turn under his hands, felt initiative return where moments earlier there had only been survival. Radios crackled with disbelief. Positions cleared. Wounded dragged to cover. 17 minutes after the first shot, the square went quiet. Elena stayed where she was, scanning, reloading, breathing. Her hands didn't shake yet. That would come later. When Hartwell approached her, he didn't start with praise. "Why did you pick up that rifle?" he asked. She thought about the question longer than the answer deserved. "Because someone had to, sir." It wasn't defiance, it wasn't pride, it was simply true. Hartwell saw then what he had missed before, not just skill, but willingness. The quiet kind that doesn't announce itself. "You broke protocol," he said. "Yes, sir." "You saved lives." She didn't answer. Some things didn't need words. How much does a moment weigh when it never leaves you? The cleanup took hours. Smoke drifted from collapsed walls. Medics worked in silence broken only by strained breathing and murmured counts. One soldier lay covered by a flag, too young for the stillness that surrounded him. Alina helped where she could, held pressure, carried supplies, avoided mirrors and thoughts she wasn't ready for. When a boy approached her and pointed at the rifle, she didn't know what to say. "You shoot bad men," he said, not asking. She nodded once. That night at the fire base, sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw bodies fall, not as enemies, not as targets, but as sudden absences where people had been. Necessary didn't mean light. Hartwell found her sitting under the stars. "You're thinking about them," he said. "Yes, sir." "Good," he replied softly. "If you ever stop thinking about them, that's when I worry." He didn't tell her it would get easier. He knew better. The next day, she wasn't rear guard anymore. Training followed, hard, unforgiving. Lane didn't spare her because she was new. Powell didn't soften corrections. She learned win the hard way, distance the painful way. She learned how exposed she'd been, how lucky she'd also been. Luck runs out, skill is what remains. When the convoy hit the ridge ambush days later, there was no confusion this time, just decisions under pressure. Long shots, heavy weapons, return fire snapping overhead like tearing cloth. Alina's shoulder ached, sweat blurred her vision, her breath came sharp and controlled. She fired anyway. She didn't think about kills. She thought about stopping what would end her people. When the RPG carrier dropped before he could fire, she felt nothing at first. Later, she would feel everything. What changes when others finally trust what you already knew about yourself? Respect didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through silence, through the absence of doubt in briefings, through the way voices changed when they said her name. Morrison apologized without excuses. Lane handed her a patch she hadn't officially earned. "You earned it another way," he said. She accepted it without celebration. Missions followed, hard ones, planned ones, ones where she was expected to perform, not surprise. She did. Each time the weight remained, but it no longer bent her spine. She learned that strength wasn't loud, that courage didn't announce itself, that dignity didn't demand recognition. It simply acted. Why does redemption never feel like relief? On a later patrol, in a village that felt alive instead of waiting to die, a girl pointed at Alina's rifle and smiled. "You protect people," the girl said. Alina thought about the village that wasn't on any map, about the well, about the first shot, about the choice no one told her to make. "I try," she said. That was the most honest answer she had. As the convoy rolled forward again, into dust and distance and whatever waited next, Alina Voss rode at the front, not because she demanded it, but because when the moment came, she had already proven where she belonged. And the battlefield, impartial as it always was, had agreed. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did her hands stay steady when everything else was falling apart? Alina didn't notice the silence right away. Silence comes in layers. First, the obvious noise drops, the gunfire thins, the shouting fades, the radio stops screaming all at once. That part everyone feels. But the deeper silence takes longer. It creeps in when your body realizes you're still alive and doesn't know what to do with that information. She stayed prone behind the vehicle, cheek still pressed to the stock of the M24, eye fixed to the scope. The square looked different now. Smoke drifted lazily instead of exploding outward. Dust settled onto broken stone. Shapes that had been threats moments ago were now just shapes again. She scanned anyway. That was the habit that refused to let go. Scan, breathe, scan again. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard, disciplined, deliberate. She didn't want to be the soldier who relaxed too early. She'd seen what that cost. A voice cut through the quiet, not shouting this time, measured, controlled. Hold positions. Nobody moves yet. General Hartwell. Alina felt her heartbeat then, hard, insistent, finally demanding attention. Her shoulder ached where the rifle had kicked against it again and again. Her mouth tasted like dust and copper. The adrenaline that had kept her upright began to loosen its grip, and with it came the tremor she'd been holding back. She swallowed and forced herself to keep breathing slow. 4 counts in, hold 4 counts out. She didn't look toward the well where the general stood. She didn't want to see his face yet. Anger, confusion, maybe worse, disappointment. She'd broken rules, she knew that. The chain of command existed for reasons she respected. She hadn't ignored it lightly. She just hadn't had the luxury. A medic ran past her, boots slipping on loose stone, headed toward the center of the square where the wounded had been dragged. Alina watched him go and felt something twist in her chest. One of them hadn't moved at all. She'd seen that too. You couldn't miss it, even from the rear. She shifted her weight carefully and lowered the rifle a few inches, keeping it ready but no longer aimed. That was when she noticed her hands were shaking. Not violently, not enough for anyone else to see. Enough for her to feel. She clenched her jaw and forced them still. This wasn't the time. She could fall apart later in private where it wouldn't cost anyone anything. Footsteps approached, heavy, unhurried, someone who didn't need to rush anymore. Voss. She looked up. Hartwell stood a few feet away, helmet under one arm, eyes scanning the rooftops even now. He didn't look angry. That surprised her more than if he had. Yes, sir. You qualified as a marksman, he asked. No, sir. The answer hung between them, stark and exposed. Then explain to me, he said calmly, how you just dismantled a coordinated ambush in under 20 minutes. She thought about lying. Not seriously, just briefly, the way people do when they're trying to protect themselves. But there wasn't a version of this story that could be softened. I pay attention, sir, she said, and I practice. He studied her face, not her rank, not her uniform, her, as if trying to reconcile the soldier in front of him with the assumptions he'd already made. Briggs arrived beside him, blood dried at his hairline. Sir, we're regaining full control. East and west clear, north secured. Hartwell nodded once. Casualties. 4 wounded, 1 KIA. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Alina looked away. She hadn't fired at the square. She hadn't seen him fall, but that didn't matter. Survival was collective, so was loss. Hartwell followed her gaze, then looked back at her. You exposed yourself, he said quietly. You operated outside your assignment. You took risks that could have gotten you killed. Yes, sir. And if you'd gone down, he continued, we'd be having a very different conversation. She met his eyes again. I know, sir. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The village seemed to hold its breath with them. Finally, he said, next time we move, you're not rear guard. Her breath caught before she could stop it. Sir. You're up front, he said, with the snipers. I'm not trained. You will be, he interrupted. And until then, you'll follow orders. You won't freelance. You won't gamble, but you won't be ignored either. She nodded, too stunned to speak. Get checked by the medic, he added, then stand by. He turned away without ceremony. Alina stayed where she was for another second, letting the words settle. Up front, the place everyone looked, the place mistakes were visible, the place where there was no cover for doubt. She didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified. Maybe both. The convoy didn't leave the village for hours. Too many wounded, too many questions. Alina helped where she could, moving crates, carrying water, holding pressure on a leg wound while the medic worked. Her hands were steady again when they needed to be. Later, when she finally sat against the vehicle with the rifle across her lap, exhaustion hit her all at once. Not the kind that made you sleep, the kind that hollowed you out. A boy approached her then, barefoot, the same one she'd seen earlier holding a stick like a rifle. He stopped a few feet away, eyes fixed on the M24. "You shoot," he said. "They stop." Alina didn't correct him. She didn't explain the cost. He was too young for that kind of truth. "Yes," she said instead. He nodded, satisfied, and ran back toward his mother. Morrison sat down beside her a moment later. He didn't look at her at first. "You know," he said, "most people would have stayed down." She shrugged slightly. "Most people weren't where I was." He exhaled, something like a laugh, something like relief. "You saved our asses." She didn't respond. Praise felt strange, heavy, like something she hadn't earned yet. That night sleep wouldn't come. The fire base was quiet, but her mind was. Every shot replayed itself, not as sound, but as consequence. She remembered the way the first shooter had leaned forward, confident, the way the second had hesitated, the way panic changed the other's movements. She told herself what everyone tells themselves: they would have killed us. They were trying to. It was necessary. All of that was true. None of it made the images leave. She got up and stepped outside, letting the cold air cut through the heat still trapped under her skin. Stars filled the sky, indifferent and impossibly distant. Hartwell joined her again without asking. "You're carrying it," he said. "Yes, sir." "That doesn't mean you're weak," he added. "It means you're human." She nodded, eyes still on the sky. "Does it ever stop?" "No," he said honestly. "You just learn how to walk with it." He left her there after that. When dawn came, it came with orders. The convoy moved north into rougher terrain. Hills, ridges, ambush country. Alina rode with Lane and Powell now, the rifle no longer an afterthought but a responsibility. Lane didn't smile when he briefed her. "Instinct kept you alive yesterday," he said. "Discipline will keep you alive tomorrow." "Yes, Sergeant." When the ridge contacts appeared, too many, too organized, there was no panic, just math, distance, wind, elevation. 800 meters, uphill, long shots. Alina settled in, heart pounding but controlled, and took her place on the line. This time, no one questioned why she was there. They just trusted her to do the job. And when the heavy weapon fell silent because of her rounds, when the convoy rolled clear because she didn't miss, she understood something she hadn't before. The hardest part wasn't pulling the trigger. It was accepting that she could, and would, do it again. Not because she wanted to, but because when it mattered, she wouldn't look away. Why did the weight feel heavier now that everyone believed in her? The ridge fell quiet in a way that felt earned, not given. The kind of silence that comes after intent has been broken, not merely paused. Alina stayed prone long after the last shot echoed away, cheek pressed to cold stone, breathing shallow and precise. Her scope still searched for movement even though her mind already knew the truth. They weren't coming back. Not today. Lane was the first to move. He shifted beside her, slow and deliberate, as if sudden motion might wake something angry and unfinished. "Convoy's clear," he said softly, eyes still glassing the ridgeline. They disengaged. Powell let out a breath he'd been holding too long. They didn't expect resistance like that. Alina didn't answer. Her hands had started shaking again, harder this time. Not fear exactly. Release. Her muscles trembled with the aftershock of control finally loosening its grip. She clenched her jaw and forced herself to stay still until it passed. Lane noticed anyway. That happens, he said, not looking at her. Adrenaline leaves faster than you expect. Body doesn't know what to do with the leftovers. She nodded once. They withdrew from the outcrop in practiced silence, slipping back into the vehicles as the convoy accelerated toward the fire base. No one cheered. No one spoke loudly. Survival rarely inspired celebration the way movies pretended it did. Mostly, it just made people quiet. Elena sat with the rifle across her lap, staring at the faint scratch along the stock where it had struck rock. Her shoulder throbbed now, each heartbeat sending a dull reminder through muscle and bone. She welcomed the pain. It anchored her, kept her from drifting into the places her mind wanted to go. Firebase Jackal rose out of the dust like a tired animal, concrete barriers, watchtowers, tents baked pale by the sun. Medics rushed the wounded away. Reeves' body was carried with careful hands, flag folded with more respect than words could ever give. Elena watched until she couldn't anymore. That night she ate alone, chicken and rice that tasted like nothing. Powell joined her eventually, setting his tray down without asking. "You did good today," he said. She stared at her food. "I missed one." He frowned. "You neutralized the threat." "I still missed." Powell studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's a sniper's answer." Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow and sharp-edged. She dreamed of winds she couldn't read and targets that wouldn't stay still. She woke before dawn, heart racing, convinced she'd forgotten something important. She hadn't. Training started that morning and didn't stop. Lane was relentless. Wind calls in terrain that lied. Range estimation without tools. Shooting from angles that punished mistakes. He corrected her stance, her breathing, her assumptions. Every time she thought she understood something, he found a way to prove she didn't, yet. "Confidence is useful," he told her after she clipped a target at 400 meters. "Overconfidence is fatal." "Yes, Sergeant." Powell taught her fieldcraft, how to disappear without hiding, how to move without leaving stories behind, how to listen to ground and shadow the way she listened to people. Elena absorbed it all with quiet intensity. She asked questions when they mattered. She practiced until her hands moved without permission. Respect came slowly, but it came. Not as praise, as trust. 2 weeks later, the orders changed. High-value target, Northern Mountains, extraction under pressure. Hartwell briefed them without drama. "This will not be forgiving," he said. "If we make mistakes, people die." Elena stood with the snipers now, not at the back of the room. She felt every eye flick toward her, then away again. No doubt this time, just assessment. She was placed on overwatch, ridge opposite the target structure. 500 meters, clear lines of sight, too exposed to feel comfortable. Lane checked her position. "You see anything you don't like, you call it." "Yes, Sergeant." "And Voss," he added quietly, "you don't carry this alone, we're here." She nodded, grateful and unsettled by the weight of that trust. The assault began just after sunrise. The first shots came fast, controlled, then everything broke loose. Elena found targets through the scope, armed figures moving between windows, rooftops, cover points she'd already mapped in her head. She fired when she had to, held fire when she didn't. Each shot landed with a familiar finality that still made something tighten in her chest. "East side 3 moving to flank," she called. "Take them," Lane replied. She did. The extraction succeeded. No friendly casualties. The kind of clean ending that felt unreal in retrospect. Back at base, Hartwell acknowledged her work with a nod that carried more weight than medals. Morrison apologized without excuses. Lane handed her a patch she hadn't earned the official way. "You earned it the hard way," he said. She stared at it for a long moment before sewing it onto her uniform. Pride flickered, brief and fragile. It didn't last. That night she sat alone again, rifle beside her, the desert quiet stretching endlessly in all directions. The weight she carried hadn't lessened with competence. If anything, it had grown clearer. She thought about the village without a name, about the boy with the stick rifle, about the girl she might never meet who would live because someone didn't hesitate. Lane found her there. "You're thinking too much," he said. She didn't deny it. "I don't feel like a hero." "Good," he replied. "Heroes stop questioning themselves." She considered that. Does it ever feel right? Lane sat beside her, staring out into the dark. "No, but it feels necessary, that's the difference." Elena nodded slowly. She wasn't sure when she crossed the line from auxiliary support to sniper. There was no ceremony, no single moment, just a series of choices made under pressure, each one narrowing the path behind her. There was no going back now. Only forward. Why did the quiet feel more dangerous than the firefight ever had? The days after the mountain extraction were slower, but they were heavier. Elena noticed it immediately. Combat had a clarity to it, targets, threats, decisions that demanded action. Between missions there was space, and space had a way of letting thoughts grow teeth. Firebase Jackal settled back into routine. Patrols rotated. Radios crackled with distant updates. Helicopters came and went, carrying supplies, wounded, and sometimes nothing at all. Life continued in that strange, suspended way it always did on the edge of conflict. Elena trained every day. Lane made sure of it. Before sunrise, before the heat climbed, before excuses could form. Wind calls from memory, unknown distance targets, shooting from awkward, punishing positions that left her muscles screaming. Lane corrected her without softness, but also without cruelty. He treated her like a professional now. That mattered more than praise. Still at night, the silence pressed in. She lay on her cot staring at the canvas ceiling, listening to the distant hum of generators and the occasional crack of gunfire far beyond the perimeter. Her body was exhausted. Her mind refused to rest. When she closed her eyes, it wasn't always the firefights that returned. Sometimes it was the pause before the first shot. Sometimes it was the second between squeeze and impact. Sometimes it was the stillness afterward. Those moments stretched longer in memory than they ever had in reality. She started keeping her rifle closer at night, not out of fear, out of grounding. The weight of it reminded her where she was, what she was doing, why she was here. It helped keep her thoughts from drifting too far inward. One evening, Powell joined her during maintenance. He watched her clean the M24 with careful, almost reverent attention. "You treat it like it's alive," he said. She didn't look up. "It demands respect." Powell nodded. "Yeah, that it does." He hesitated, then added, "You know people talk." She paused. "About what?" "About you, some of it good, some of it less so." She resumed cleaning. "They always do." Powell studied her for a moment. "Doesn't bother you?" "It used to," she admitted. "Now it just feels like noise." That was mostly true. But not entirely. A few days later the tension broke, not outward but inward. The unit lost a patrol to an IED on a secondary route north of the firebase. Not Elena's team, not anyone she'd worked closely with, but close enough to feel it, close enough to attend the quiet briefing afterward where names were read and no one spoke. One of the wounded was flown in just after dusk. Elena helped carry the stretcher, her hands steady, her face unreadable. The soldier was young, younger than she felt inside despite being only 26. Later she sat alone behind the barriers, staring at the dirt. Lane approached without comment and sat beside her. "You're thinking it could have been you," he said. She nodded. "Good," he replied. "Means you understand the margins." She frowned slightly. "That doesn't make it easier." "No," he agreed. "It makes it honest." The next mission briefing came sooner than expected. Long-range recon. No contact expected, but no contact was never a promise. Alina was assigned Overwatch again, this time solo for part of the rotation. Lane trusted her now. That trust felt heavier than scrutiny ever had. The terrain was open and deceptive, rolling hills, sparse cover, wind that shifted without warning. She took position before dawn, settling into the earth like she'd always belonged there. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Those were the hardest hours. Her legs cramped, her shoulder numbed. Her scope found the same rocks again and again. She forced herself to stay alert, to treat every shadow as potential, every movement as meaningful. When the recon team finally returned without contact, relief washed through her, but it was muted, controlled, almost guilty. Back at base, Hartwell called her into his office. "You're adapting well," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment. "Do you know why I moved you up front?" She hesitated. "Because I could shoot." "That's the easy answer," he said. "The real one is harder. You didn't wait for permission when lives were on the line. You didn't freeze, but you also didn't chase glory." She said nothing. "That balance is rare," Hartwell continued, "and dangerous because it isolates people." Alina met his gaze. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," he said, "but the battlefield doesn't ask, it assigns." When she left his office, she felt both seen and exposed. The next night she dreamed of the village again, but this time it was quiet. No gunfire, no smoke, just the dry well and the empty square. She stood alone with the rifle, unable to move, while unseen eyes watched from shuttered windows. She woke with her heart racing. The following morning, the unit prepared to move again. Another convoy, another stretch of road that looked harmless until it was. Alina took her place with Lane and Powell, the M24 resting comfortably against her shoulder. As the vehicles rolled out, she watched the landscape slide past and felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the weight she carried. Resolve. Not the sharp, brittle kind that cracked under pressure, but something steadier, quieter. She didn't know how long she'd be here. She didn't know how many more lines she'd have to cross. But she knew this. She wouldn't pretend she was someone else just to make others comfortable. When the convoy stopped briefly near a small settlement, children watched from a distance. No fear, just curiosity. One girl raised her hand and waved. Alina hesitated, then waved back. Lane noticed. "You're not supposed to get attached," he said. "I'm not," Alina replied. "I'm remembering why it matters." The convoy moved on. The sun climbed higher. And Alina Voss, once invisible, once relegated to the edges, remained steady at the center of things, carrying not just a rifle, but the quiet understanding that strength didn't come from being unafraid. It came from acting anyway, even when the silence was louder than the fight. Why did the moment she feared most arrive without warning? The call came just before dawn, soft enough that it almost felt polite. No sirens, no frantic shouting, just a radio crackle and Hartwell's voice, low and precise, cutting through the thin layer of sleep Alina had finally managed to claim. "Stand by, we've got movement." She was on her feet before the words finished landing. The air was cool, the kind that tricked you into believing the day might be merciful. It never was. She checked the rifle by feel, muscle memory guiding her hands, and moved to the briefing area where the rest of the unit gathered in quiet clusters. This mission was different, not louder, not bigger. Closer. A partner unit had gone dark overnight while transiting a narrow pass less than 15 kilometers from Jackal. No contact, no distress signal, just absence. And absence out here was never neutral. Search and secure, limited intel, possible ambush. Alina felt the weight settle in her chest before anyone assigned positions. Lane caught her eye and gave a slight nod. No reassurance, no warning, just acknowledgement, "You're in this." They moved fast. The terrain narrowed quickly. walls of rock rising on either side, the road squeezing into something that felt more like a decision than a path. Elena took overwatch on a ridge above the pass, higher than she liked, more exposed than she wanted. But it was the only angle that made sense. She settled in, scanning through the scope as the search team advanced below. Vehicles appeared first, disabled, doors open, no bodies in sight. That was wrong. Her pulse quickened. She adjusted her position, sweeping the rock faces, the scrub, the shadows that didn't quite line up with the light. "Something off," she said into the radio. Her voice was steady, even as her instincts screamed. "Copy," Lane replied. "Hold." Minutes stretched thin, the kind of thin that snaps without warning. The first shot didn't come from where she expected. It came from behind her. The crack echoed sharp and close, the round slamming into rock inches from her position. Elena rolled instinctively, heart hammering, rifle swinging as she searched for the source. She missed it. The realization hit harder than the near miss. She'd been so focused on the pass below that she'd assumed her rear was safe. High ground bred arrogance if you let it. She didn't let it again. Movement, left flank. A shooter partially concealed behind stone, adjusting his position after firing. She fired first this time. The target dropped, but relief didn't follow. More shots rang out below. The ambush unfolded all at once, like a trap finally sprung. "Elena, we're taking fire," Lane called. "Multiple positions." "I see them," she replied, already shifting. Her scope found muzzle flashes along the pass walls, fighters pouring fire into the trapped vehicles below. She fired, worked the bolt, fired again. Then she heard it, the sound she'd been dreading since the village. Someone screaming her name. She looked down. Lane was hit. Not down, not yet, but pinned, bleeding from the thigh, pressed against rock with no clear cover. Powell was firing to keep heads down, but the angle was wrong. They were exposed. Elena's breathing spiked. For the first time in weeks, panic clawed its way in. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't targets and distance. This was someone she knew. Someone who trusted her. She forced the panic down, hard enough it hurt. "Lane's hit," Powell said, voice tight. "We need cover." "I've got it," Elena replied. She shifted position, ignoring the risk, sliding lower on the ridge to change her angle. Rounds snapped overhead. One struck close enough to shower her with dirt and stone. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Her scope found the shooter pinning Lane, clear shot, exposed. She fired. Another moved into place, smarter, stayed low. Elena waited, seconds stretched. Her arms trembled with the strain of holding position. She ignored it. The shooter leaned out just enough. She squeezed. Lane crawled back into cover as Powell dragged him clear. Elena didn't watch. She kept firing, breaking the rhythm of the ambush, forcing hesitation where coordination had been. Air support was inbound, but not yet. Until then, it was her. A round tore through the edge of her pack, ripping fabric and jolting her sideways. The impact stole her breath. Pain flared sharp and bright along her ribs. She sucked in air and kept shooting. Fear tried again, louder this time. "You're exposed. You're alone. You're going to die here." She answered it with discipline. Shot, breathe, bolt, shot. Minutes later, an eternity later, the sound of rotors cut through the chaos. The enemy scattered. The pass fell silent except for the wounded and the echo of what had almost happened. Elena stayed in position until Lane's voice came over the radio, weak but alive. "Good work," he said. "You did good." Her hands finally gave in then, shaking violently as the adrenaline drained away. She pressed her forehead to the rifle stock and breathed until the world steadied. Back at Jackal, the medics worked on Lane. He'd walk again. It would take time. He smiled at her through the pain and said nothing else. That night, Elena sat alone again, But this time the rifle wasn't enough to ground her. She replayed the moment she'd missed the shooter behind her, how close it had come, how easily it could have ended differently. Hartwell joined her later, his presence quiet but solid. "You hesitated today," he said. "Yes, sir." "That's not a criticism," he added. "It means you're invested." She stared at the dirt. "I almost got him killed." "But you didn't," Hartwell replied, "and you learned something." She nodded slowly. "What?" he asked. "That confidence can turn into blindness," she said. "And that fear doesn't mean you stop. It means you choose carefully." Hartwell smiled faintly. "That's a lesson some people never learn." Alina looked up at the stars, the same indifferent sky she'd stared at nights before. She felt older now, not hardened, just more aware of the margins. She understood something she hadn't before. Redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about carrying them forward, without letting them decide who you became. Tomorrow she would go back out. She would scan more carefully. She would trust, but verify. She would carry the weight of today alongside all the others. Not because she wanted to prove anything, but because when it mattered most, she had learned the difference between fear and failure. And she refused to confuse the two. Why did the ending feel quieter than the beginning ever had? The final mission didn't announce itself as final. They rarely did. No dramatic briefing, no ominous pause, just another set of coordinates passed across a table worn smooth by elbows and maps, another objective described in careful, unemotional language. Route security, civilian corridor, short duration. Routine. Alina had learned by now that routine was where the most truth lived. The road wound through low terrain this time, flatter, greener than the mountains. Fields stretched out on either side, interrupted by small clusters of homes that looked temporary even when they weren't. Life persisted here in ways war never fully managed to erase. Children ran alongside the convoy at a distance. Farmers paused their work to watch it pass. Alina rode in the lead Overwatch vehicle, rifle cradled in her arms, eyes scanning not just for threats, but for patterns. She had learned the difference. Threats were loud, patterns whispered. Lane wasn't beside her this time. He was still recovering, stubborn as ever, already arguing with medics about timelines. Powell sat across from her instead, quieter than usual, eyes on the horizon. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked suddenly. She glanced at him. "Why?" "Because that's the look people get when they're deciding something." She considered it. "I don't know yet." He nodded. "Fair." The convoy slowed near a narrow stretch of road where the fields pinched in and visibility dropped. Alina felt it before she could explain it. That subtle tightening. The sense that the environment had leaned forward to listen. She raised a hand. "Hold," she said into the radio. "I don't like this." Hartwell responded immediately. "Talk to me." "No specific contact," she replied. "Just too quiet, the ground's wrong." There was a pause, not hesitation, consideration. "Convoy halt," Hartwell ordered. The vehicle stopped. Seconds passed, then more. Nothing happened. Somewhere behind them a child laughed. Somewhere ahead a bird took flight. And then Alina saw it. A glint, brief, unnatural, half buried near the road's edge. "Possible device," she said, 10 meters out, right side. The engineers moved in carefully. Confirmed it moments later. Crude. Buried shallow. Enough to shred a vehicle if they'd rolled forward another few seconds. The realization hit Alina harder than any firefight. If she hadn't spoken. If she'd doubted herself. If she'd waited for certainty instead of trusting instinct. They cleared the device. The convoy rerouted. No casualties, no shots fired. Just a quiet avoidance of something that would never make a report dramatic enough to remember. They reached their destination without incident. Later, as dusk settled over the temporary base, Hartwell found her again. He seemed older somehow. Or maybe she was just better at seeing it now. "You stopped something today," he said. "Yes, sir. You know most people won't ever hear about it." She nodded. "That's okay." He studied her. "That answer tells me more than any after-action report." They stood in silence for a while, watching the light fade. "I'm being rotated out," Hartwell said eventually. "End of tour." She looked at him then, surprised. "I didn't know." "I didn't tell many people," he replied. "Didn't want it to become a thing." She understood that instinct. Endings carried weight whether you acknowledged them or not. "Whatever you decide to do next," he continued, "remember this. Leadership isn't about rank or recognition. It's about who acts when no one is watching." "Yes, sir." He nodded once and walked away. That night, Alina didn't sit alone. Powell joined her. Then Morrison. No speeches, no confessions, just shared silence and the quiet understanding of people who had seen each other at their edges. Later, Alina cleaned her rifle one last time under the open sky. The M24 lay disassembled in familiar pieces, each one carrying memory and meaning. She worked slowly, deliberately, the way she always had. When she finished, she didn't rush to reassemble it. She let it rest. At dawn, the convoy prepared to move again, this time without her. Alina stood off to the side, duffel at her feet, uniform still dust-stained, patch worn but intact. Lane had insisted on walking out to see her despite the medic's objections. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded. "It's time." "For what?" She smiled faintly. "To choose instead of react." He extended his hand. She shook it, firm, respectful, unspoken gratitude passing between them. "You were never rear guard," he said. "You just hadn't been noticed yet." "Maybe," she replied. "Or maybe I needed to notice myself first." Powell hugged her briefly, awkward and sincere. Morrison gave her a nod that carried an apology he no longer needed to say out loud. The vehicles rolled out in a cloud of dust and sound. Alina stayed where she was until they disappeared beyond the road. The base felt strange without the constant motion. Too still, too open. She slung her bag over her shoulder and started walking toward the administrative building to complete the last of her paperwork. On the way, she passed a group of local children near the fence line. One of them, a girl not much older than the one from the other village, watched her curiously. "You soldier?" the girl asked. Alina stopped, thought carefully. "I was," she said. The girl tilted her head. "What now?" Alina looked out toward the road, then back at the girl. "Now I protect people in a different way." The girl smiled, satisfied with that answer, and ran back to her friends. Alina continued on. Months later, far from the dust and the noise, Alina stood on a firing range back home, not as a shooter but as an instructor. New recruits lined up before her, nervous, uncertain, eager to prove something. She saw herself in their posture, in their questions, in the way some of them tried to look invisible and others tried to be seen. She taught them fundamentals first, not just marksmanship, but restraint, observation, the discipline of waiting when every instinct told you to act. She didn't tell war stories unless they asked, and even then she chose them carefully. One evening, after the range was cleared and the sun dipped low, a young woman approached her. "Ma'am," she said, "how do you know when to take the shot?" Alina considered the question. "You don't," she answered honestly. "You know when not to." The recruit frowned, thinking. Alina smiled. Some lessons needed time. Later, alone, Alina cleaned a different rifle, lighter, familiar. She worked with the same care she always had. Some habits weren't tied to place or rank. They were tied to identity. She thought about the village with no name, about the ridge, about the moment she chose to stand up instead of stay down. She didn't romanticize it anymore, didn't minimize it either. It was simply part of her. And she understood now that strength wasn't loud. It didn't demand recognition or applause. It didn't announce itself with speeches or symbols. Strength was quiet. It noticed what others missed. It acted when it had to. It carried the weight without pretending it was light. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.